New Zealand has a legacy.
I just knew.
Disasters that have shaped our country.
A catastrophic earthquake hit Hawke's Bay.
Six celebrated New Zealanders retrace some of this country's darkest days, bringing history alive through the eyes of descendants.
I could hear people screaming and crying and yelling. The stench was so bad. You could smell death.
It was my Uncle Kevin.
The vast oceans around New Zealand can be a violent and unpredictable place. New Zealand and crossed the Tasman on my yacht Swirly World. Both and mentally, their highs and lows.
I survived both my big voyages.
Our coastlines have claimed thousands of ships over the years, but the wreck of the SS Wairarapa was one of the worst, with the loss of around 130 lives.
So these days, this is all that's left of the Wairarapa. It's essentially a graveyard that's just rusting away until there's nothing there.
How could such a terrible disaster The SS Wairarapa left Sydney bound for Auckland on October the 24th, 1894. Crossing the Tasman was pretty routine, but for the roughly 235 passengers and crew, this voyage would become a terrifying ordeal. Amongst the passengers was Felix West and his family, who were immigrating to New Zealand from England. Also on board were Mariano Vella and his new wife Elizabeth. After being married in Europe, they were also heading to New Zealand to begin their new life together. Charlotte MacDonald. Just a few weeks earlier, the Wairarapa's experienced and highly regarded skipper, Captain John McIntosh, had reportedly set a new record for the Trans-Tasman crossing. Being fast and first was very important in the competitive and cutthroat business, but struck heavy fog as he neared New Zealand.
They came down and were pushed out towards Great Barrier, totally off course.
As night fell, some of the passengers and crew became worried about the ship's speed, the fog, and the captain's strange behaviour.
Some of them asked him to slow down or at least sound the foghorn, but McIntosh refused. And this is exactly where the ship struck. Steamed in, full steam ahead from the north, smacked.
Some of the passengers and crew made it into lifeboats, but more than half of them stayed with the ship in a desperate battle for their lives.
There were huge sea. As dawn broke, there was still a big swell washing all around the rocks here, and second engine rope ashore.
But onto the rocks himself. To a steward called Benjamin Kendall. After 3 attempts, he finally made it, and the difficult job of getting the survivors ashore began. The first person on the rope was Sarah Williams, who was travelling with her sister Jane. A passenger, Mrs. Mary Ferguson, described the awful scenes in her diary.
The poor girl, who was quite exhausted, had to be pulled back through the water again to the vessel. At our feet.
Mrs. Ferguson asked a steward
Said to me, it is perhaps kindest to leave her at peace. So there, for the first time, we might be there for weeks before we were found and perish miserably from the cold and hunger. What a shocker of a situation for these people to be in.
Personal account that my grandfather wrote of the disaster. Fog came down and continued to enshroud all those maritime marks intended to safeguard the course of a vessel. I, like many others, had premonitions of trouble. Moreover, the steamer dashed ahead at full speed, 12 knots. The result of this on rocks at Miner's Head on the northwest tip of the Great Barrier.
The ship took an immediate list to port, and it was difficult to climb.
This was Felix. This is before.
in the chaos and panic.
So I was invited by a group of men clinging to a boat davit to come up and join them.
A davit is one of these little curly things here, and they're sort of set up so the lifeboats are hanging in them. Then they can swing the davits overboard and then lower the lifeboats down. So it would have been somewhere around here that they...
To land, aren't they?
That's right. I mean, and yet so close and yet so far away in terms of the surge that you can't see in that still photo is what was killing people.
Rope.
That's this here. So from the davits halfway down the vessel where they were staying, you know, during the dark hours, they managed to work their way up this outside edge where the rope was attached from the bow across to the rocks.
Swung over to the island. Yeah. I pay a tribute of thanks to all those who were a means of salvation.
Here's Felix. He's survived, and no one else in his family has.
No.
Totally alone,
I know.
as far as he's concerned.
Must have been a terrible feeling. With anybody, or...
Terrible.
What makes him unique was that he was very young. He was the youngest survivor. But
Felix west, leaving him completely alone.
Wanganui Collegiate, where he boarded. I was launched on a further sea of troubled waters, and with it, life at I felt parents seemed to sleep in great aunt and my aunt, they'd all he had his own little area within the lounge, and he would be
Felix from another passenger, Elizabeth Vella.
Captain McIntosh was not temperate at all. She met a barmaid some years afterwards who said that at Lyttelton he had to be helped on board. This was not an isolated instance. It was always thought that alcohol was one of the causes for the shipwreck, and that's why there was not a drop of alcohol in that house.
So who was Elizabeth Vella, and how did Felix come to be corresponding with her? Well, the story starts in Plympton, just north of Wellington.
Island. You'd have to be pretty hardy stock to want to go out there and start farming.
Mariano's first wife died, leaving him with 4 children to raise and a farm to run. So he went back to Europe to remarry. He was returning to New Zealand with his new bride when they were shipwrecked on the Wairarapa. Okay, so Elizabeth, who was...
When they came over from Europe,
I was sound asleep, and my husband, he said,
into a lifeboat.
but I was in a boat. The boat went to the side of the ship and smashed the boat and nearly killed us, and we went in the water.
But in the cold, surging sea, they became separated. Luckily, Elizabeth managed to grab a piece of wreckage to keep herself afloat.
My husband said, stay there, not move until I find you. And he said, well, I'll call your name, and when you're close to me, answer, then I know. To me and be balanced.
Together, they clung to the piece of wreckage.
Just married. on an animal. Animal.
Well, it must have been.
So this photo was taken just days after they got back from the wreck into Auckland, was it?
Yes.
She's a good looker, isn't she?
Yes,
Elizabeth.
yes.
Despite the disastrous start to their marriage, Mariano and Elizabeth went on to lead a prosperous life. And their house is still in the family, 5 generations later. So, Bernie, how long have you actually lived here?
I've lived here my children are now the 5th generation, so it's quite special.
So what do you recall of Elizabeth actually living here?
So I was very scared to come here when I was little.
And you'd freak out.
It was, yeah. Yeah, it was very freaky.
Uses Mariano's boat shed. A boat shed that was a vital part of farming on Mana Island while Elizabeth ran the household back on the mainland. So before they had VHF radios and cell phones, how did they communicate?
A lot of it was done with signals. So he'd light a fire or hold a lamp of some kind and indicate with those sort of things. So he'd have somebody here on shore, normally Elizabeth, and he'd be over there and he'd signal that he's all okay and coming back.
And it was probably this
My rapper, the whole time he would have been thinking, it's my brand new wife, I've just, only met her. Then he shipwrecks her, they lose all their trousseau and everything that they've got. And imagine being in the water and thinking, how...
Mariano and Elizabeth's survival was pretty remarkable. And there's still a Vela
As it turns out, Mariano was our great-granddad, and he survived with his second wife, Elizabeth, and I was descended from Mariano and his first wife.
Brian's now living as close as anyone physically can to the site of the shipwreck. His house
Family connection is with my second wife, Billy, and she has connection to the old people who looked after the survivors. And if you read
dived and sailed these waters for years. Brian knows the area well. So what's this northwestern part of the coast of Great Barrier like?
get large ocean swells curling around the top end of the Needles and barreling all the way.
These cliffs look evil. What a place. So how did the Wairarapa, once the pride of the Union Steamship Company fleet, end up wrecked on these rocks? These days, Port Chalmers is a totally different place.
85 feet long, quite narrow of beam, just a huge responsibility. This is really very finely finished. You've got a lot of wonderful joinery, cabinet maker stuff, really. Skylights, you've got the upholstery, looks like carpets. This is obviously at the time state of the art. Then you got Mackintosh himself. Here he is. Mackintosh, Captain Mackintosh, had had a whole life on the sea. That's obviously the case, and almost 20 which is what makes the rumours of him being drunk so out of character. In the fog. So this is one of the newspaper reports from the day. Quoting, it says, Mr. Chick said we ought to lay to and not attempt to reach Auckland that night, as he'd been in a shipwreck before when the captain hadn't followed in character, really. He was a pillar of society and even served a couple of terms on the local borough council. In fact, his name still lives on in Port Chalmers today. Chick's Hotel was a favourite haunt for sailors. And apparently, back in the day, it was legendary for having the cheapest booze and the nastiest slags this side of the Pacific. But Chick's Hotel was notorious Shanghaiing involved kidnapping drunken sailors and forcing them to sea. We'll never know whether it's true or not, whether it's an urban legend or a Chick's Hotel legend. Who knows, but it's quite possible. George Chick's body was one of dozens that was never recovered from the Wairarapa. But just down the road, there's a monument with Charlotte MacDonald was a stewardess and was asleep when the ship struck. Charlotte put the lives of her passengers ahead of her own. Without it, she later drowned. Charlotte MacDonald worked, and it turns out that working at sea is something that's run in her family ever since. Jim Hawkins is the skipper of the Otago Harbour Board's pilot boat.
Pilot boat, yes, yes.
And you're driving it?
Yes.
So what about, does it run in the family? Like, it's a...
I think so, all the way through. Is all my forefathers were all seamen.
Okay, thank you. Two.
I don't usually want to get this close to something like that. But Jim's got us all sorted out. Always admired well, it's a precarious moment boarding something that's as huge as a ship.
Although Jim's been working
and her parents coming from Dundee. That's the only...
Charlotte's name in here?
Yeah, that's Charlotte there, Charlotte Octoloni. Yeah, that's her.
But there's a lot more to Charlotte McDonald's story, and the best place to find it is back at the local museum in Port Chalmers.
So
in 1880, and then he was serving on the Manapuri and for some reason fell overboard up in the upper harbour near Dunedin and drowned, leaving her with 4 young children, and she also was looking after her aged mother.
And did any information ever come out how he fell overboard or what the situation?
I didn't know he had. Yeah, that's
No.
totally news to me at all.
Yeah,
Totally,
yeah.
Obvious choice was a Union Steamship Company, Port Chalmers' biggest employer.
She went to sea as a stewardess, and then she obviously did well because she was the chief stewardess on the Wairarapa.
New and set up, yeah.
Inquiry into the shipwreck, the magistrate said the stewardesses preferred death to neglect or dishonour. The conduct of these noble, self-sacrificing women is beyond human praise. But I wonder if her employer acted quite as honourably. But behind the closed doors of the Union Steamship Company's head office, it was a different story. These records are now safely held in the Hocken Library.
After the shipwreck, it appears that the company are consulting their lawyers to see how their liability stands. Opinion of Smith, Chapman, Sinclair, White that the clauses on passengers' tickets absolved the company from liability for loss of life. So this looks to me like the lawyers are telling them that they don't have to pay out compensation. And all the way through here, people's claims are being denied. Just seems so cold-hearted, it's outrageous.
But one of the saddest entries is
Letter from Auckland manager on behalf of Miss Williams for loss of her luggage at the wreck of the Wairarapa. Not her sister, just her luggage. And they've declined that one as well. It seems incredibly hard-hearted of the company just to reply, declined.
It also looks like the company was looking for a scapegoat.
So what's an aberration of intellect? Obviously, they're suggesting that he sort of lost his mind, gone crazy. They're clearly trying to put the blame on the captain.
Captain McIntosh may have been sick, but I think he was also under enormous pressure. Just a year before the Wairarapa disaster, an Australian company, Hutter Parker, had entered the trans-Tasman market. All through these company minutes, there are references to Hutter Parker, and there's no doubt the Union Steamship Company were concerned about their new rival. But why was it so important for the Union Company to maintain its monopoly?
The Union Company was formed in Dunedin in 1875. So it was natural, if you're setting up a shipping line, that was the place to go.
If you put it into a modern context, how big, by comparison today, would it be to who?
Oh, at its peak, if you add Air New Zealand, Kiwi Rail and Mainfreight, you've got it. It was an enormous enterprise. It was our first multinational company.
And clearly the Union Steam competition between the two companies even led to ships racing each other.
There's a lovely photograph of the Warramoo belting into Lyttelton entrance there, smoke everywhere, and in the background you see the Rotomahana, almost obscure but also smoke. Now, it's obviously a race. The masters at the time would deny that it was a race. They would say they were making schedule.
It was an ominous coincidence, but 10 years before being wrecked on Great Barrier Island, the Wairarapa was involved in a collision with another ship while racing near Melbourne. Could this rivalry explain Captain Mackintosh's behaviour on the night of the shipwreck? I've come back to Great Barrier Island with the great-grandson of Walter Tulloch, the Wairarapa's 4th officer. There's no doubt the captain played a big part in the shipwreck, but some of his crew did perform admirably in the circumstances. So this is Walter Tulloch.
This is Walter Tulloch.
How old were you, John, when you met him?
The earliest recollection, I'd be 4 years old. Of a rather austere man, very nattily dressed in a brown pinstripe suit with his little gold chain. Always very, very neat.
Did he talk to you about the wreck?
Yes. Walter was off duty. He was actually in his cabin. He shared it with the 3rd officer, Mr. Johnson. And he was lying. And he realised something major had happened, and he came out to the companionway.
So there's a picture here of one of the lifeboats on deck, and
when it was launched, it had only about 8 or 9 people. So he ended up with 29 people in a boat that was only supposed to carry about 12. Once the lights on the ship went out, which was about 20 minutes after the accident,
what it was like that night?
No, he said there was a lot of shouting and I recall him talking about the horses screaming. There was 16 horses on.
And they were in the water with the people?
They were in the water, the people kicking, and he said that he thought the horses killed quite a few people.
Right. In the chaos, the captain was seen diving from the bridge. The speed the ship was going, you know, that was imprudent, wasn't it? I mean, it's actually against the rules.
It was totally against the Union Company. Drunk as a skunk. He had suffered from the flu, and the only cure for flu in those days was whiskey. Everybody said the captain was drunk. It was the captain's personal assistant that said he hadn't, to his knowledge, taken any alcohol. Yeah.
So you think he was just...
we think there was a big cover-up.
Whether Captain Mackintosh was drunk or not, when the Wairarapa sank off Great Barrier Island in 1894, the 4th officer, Walter Tulloch, quickly launched his lifeboat and picked up 29 survivors. They stayed
He landed, yeah, gosh.
Yeah, and here's a chart. So where was it, John?
The wreck was right here on against the cliffs here at Miner's Head.
Right in there.
And they all the way down, right back down here, round here, and back in onto the beach here.
Landing?
Yes.
On this east coast?
On this east coast, yep. Walter always said it was just a short row, but it's actually around about 10 or 11 miles.
That's a killer row.
And he always...
Compared to where they were.
Yeah.
There were European settlers at Whangapoa Beach who no doubt helped the 60-odd survivors from the lifeboats. But Walter didn't stop there.
His duty was to get the people to Auckland, or the survivors to Auckland.
Right, so it's not
The chief engineer walked across to get help and left the rest of the crew and the passengers there.
Okay, and that's 3 miles straight line.
3 miles in a straight line.
But that could turn into 6 miles, really, couldn't it?
Easily.
And it's up and down. It's not flat.
No.
Fitzroy, where the back to Auckland himself, where he immediately sent a telegram to his father in Port Chalmers.
And it says, been wrecked, barrier, quite well, lost everything. Signed, W. Tulloch. We were told that this was the first telegram sent regarding the wreck to Port Chalmers. Before that, the shipping company didn't know anything about it.
So this was the first knowledge that they had, that the actual company, of the disaster.
So we've been told, yes.
And then this would have spread right through the community, of course.
Oh, it sure would have, yeah.
So being here now, John,
No, I do feel that the enormity of it all and the sense of history with it, we've always lived with it, but we never realised white lifeboats coming ashore crowded with people and just hitting the shore and then sorting themselves out.
three boats up to the wreck site. Them. A joyful shout. Then we were soon off with a boat full of women and Felix West, another lad about 16 years old. Survivors were there who had got away in boats, so we were quite a large party. All the Maori At the time, Great Barrier was a remote and keep the history of the Wairarapa alive.
Great-grandfather, 1859.
opening their homes and their kitchens until help arrived from Auckland.
All the settlers and the people from Catherine Bay were all there virtually on the morning of the wreck. And people would have been with you know, the whole time, and so with bodies and
big chaos.
Yeah. Was presented to the family by the Union Steamship Company. It was inscribed with a inscription that it just said presented to the Flynn family for services at wreck of SS Wairarapa.
It's in good nick.
Yeah, for something that was used for and they've got the Wairarapa lifebelt up there.
Over the years, other artefacts from the shipwreck have found their way back to the island and are now displayed in the local boat club. Barrier are the grave sites, as well as the gruesome task of recovering the body.
Under the surf and the work on, this is quite a nice place to end up. But when it comes to the Wairarapa and Captain McIntosh, I just wonder whether he'd lost sight of that. It was reckless, it was bizarre behaviour to be going that fast in those conditions. So I've really started to appreciate the effect it's had